The Chiefs faced a brutal loss on national television, with over 126 million viewers watching what was arguably their most embarrassing defeat of the Patrick Mahomes era. So, what went wrong? Well, in this video, I'll dive into exactly that and also try to offer some hope for Chiefs fans, despite how painful this loss was. But first, how about those? I honestly don't even know where to begin. I'm going to crack open a garage beer to get through this because last night was just ridiculous, and I barely slept. I had titled Friday's video something like, "The Chiefs will shock the world in Super Bowl 59." And yeah, shock the world they did, but not in the way we expected. The pressure was on, with a third Super Bowl appearance at stake. Even though the Eagles seemed stronger on paper at nearly every position, I had faith in the Chiefs' coaching staff and Mahomes to pull off something special when the lights were brightest. Turns out, I was way off. And don't worry, I'm not going to go over every painful moment from this blowout. We all know the Eagles dominated from start to finish. They earned their bragging rights all offseason, no doubt about it. I'm not here to complain or whine about the refs. Officiating has been inconsistent, but that's part of the game. You've got to push through it, outplay your opponent, and the Chiefs just didn't do that. There's a lot to unpack from this game, and we're not going to shy away from any of it. So, let's break it down. Before the game, I said the Chiefs needed 4 things to win. First, they needed to get ahead early. They didn't do that. Second, they needed to win the turnover battle. They didn't do that either. Third, they needed to score around 30 points. Well, kind of, but not really. Finally, they needed to limit Saquon Barkley to under 100 rushing yards. Now, if I only showed you the Chiefs' score of 22 points and told you Saquon had 25 carries for just 57 yards, no touchdowns, and a long run of 10 yards, you might think the Chiefs actually won, or at least lost in a close, nail-biting finish. But no, we were all wrong. While the Chiefs did a solid job limiting Saquon, Philly's running game wasn't all about him. Jalen Hurts took full advantage, running for 72 yards on 11 carries, really causing problems for the Chiefs' defense. On the flip side, the Chiefs' running game was almost non-existent. They managed just 11 carries for 49 yards. But if you take out Mahomes' 4 scrambles for 25 yards, the running backs only accounted for 24 yards on 7 carries. To make matters worse, they only had 3 carries for 3 yards in the first half. Andy Reid mentioned that the Chiefs moved away from the run because they found themselves trailing early, but that doesn't explain the first 3 drives, when it was still a one-score game. On those drives, they ran 9 pass plays and just 1 run. When the Eagles kicked a field goal to go up 10-0, it wasn't a huge deal. The Chiefs have trailed by 10 in nearly every Super Bowl they've played, and they've always been able to chip away at the deficit. Whether they run or pass, they could have found some momentum. Instead, it was pass after pass after pass, which eventually led to back-to-back sacks and a desperate out-of-character throw from Mahomes on 3rd down, I think it was 3rd and 16, that ended in a pick 6 by rookie cornerback Cooper D. D read Mahomes perfectly and made a great play, putting the Eagles up 17-0. At that point, the Chiefs were forced to press, moving further away from the run game. Prior to that, there were 12 pass plays and only 1 run called in the first quarter and a half. I get that the Chiefs are a pass-first team, but that kind of imbalance was absurd. The coaching decisions in this game were a failure, especially on the offensive side of the ball. The defense, on the other hand, actually did a pretty solid job overall, though they weren't entirely blameless. So we need to talk about that as well. Now, let's give credit where it's due. The Chiefs' defense sold out to stop Saquon Barkley, and they succeeded in that mission. They held the Eagles to just 3 for 12 on 3rd downs and 0 for 1 on 4th downs. Philly had to settle for 4 field goals, and Brian Cook picked off Jalen Hurts early with a perfectly timed blitz by Steve Spagnuolo. They also forced a turnover on downs later in the game. There were just a few moments where the defense wasn't as disciplined, and it cost them a bit. For instance, Trent McDuffie committed a soft, unnecessary roughness penalty early in the first quarter during an incompletion. It was 3rd and 5, and that penalty moved the chains, eventually leading to the first Eagles touchdown. That was really the last major penalty issue for the Chiefs, and honestly, self-inflicted mistakes were the primary reason they lost. If you're blaming the refs for this loss, it's time to stop, take a deep breath, and reflect on what happened. The Chiefs were down 40-6 with just 3 minutes left in the game, and that was not because of the referees. It was a tough loss, and we can't shift the blame elsewhere. There was another penalty that initially seemed like it could hurt, when Jalen Hurts got sacked on 3rd and 4 for a loss of 10, but Charles Omenihu was offside. That turned what should have been a 4th and 14 into a first down. Fortunately, that drive ended with a Brian Cook interception, so no harm was done. There was also a penalty on Nick Bolton for a late hit on Saquon Barkley, which would have been 3rd and 26, but became 1st and 10 instead. Luckily, they punted shortly after that, so it didn't lead to much. But besides those two, the defense had its share of struggles, especially when they were heavily focused on stopping Saquon Barkley. McDuffie gave up a few passes to A.J. Brown, and that touchdown catch by Brown came on a shallow crosser with Nick Bolton in coverage. I mean, seriously, how does that even happen? Nick Bolton trying to cover A.J. Brown is almost laughable. Honestly, it made me need another sip of this garage beer. That play was also tied to Mahomes' second interception, but we'll get to that in a bit. Credit to Jalen Hurts, though. The few passes he needed to make in the game were clutch. He threw one down the sideline to Jahan Dotson that set up a successful brotherly shove touchdown, and then later, he threw a perfect 46-yard bomb to Devonta Smith to put Philly up 34-0 with 2:40 left in the third quarter. For those of you wondering why I keep laughing through all this, it's my nervous reaction. Laughter through pain, I guess. Now here's the crazy part. That 46-yard touchdown pass to Smith wasn't even Hurts's best throw of the night. Mahomes actually threw a beautiful 50-yard bomb to Xavier Worthy near the end of the game for a touchdown, though it was pretty much a garbage time score with the Chiefs already trailing 40-6. Still, Worthy's performance stood out, and even though it was in a losing effort, it was impressive. Worthy ended up having one of the greatest rookie Super Bowl performances, even though most of it came during the Chiefs' last few drives. He had nearly 100 yards and a touchdown across 3 playoff games, which is a bright spot in a very dark moment. I'm excited to see him and Rashee Rice working together next season, though it'll have to wait until Rice returns from suspension. Worthy truly looks like the real deal. Xavier Worthy finished the night with an impressive 8 catches on 8 targets, catching every pass thrown his way for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's an incredible stat line, but let's be real. It was in garbage time, and by then, it was too little. Too late. The Chiefs' chances were long gone by that point. Something else worth noting was Chris Jones pulling up limping with about 6 minutes left in the third quarter. It looked like he hurt his knee, and he spent some time adjusting his knee brace while hopping on one leg. That didn't look good at all. Fortunately, he returned to the game with 29 seconds left in the third quarter, but he was eventually ruled doubtful to return and never came back. We never got any clear details on what exactly happened to his knee, but let's hope it's not something too serious. Jones is the best player on the Chiefs' defense, and they're going to need him healthy next season. Another major issue for the Chiefs was their offensive line. The Eagles pretty much won this game from the trenches. That was honestly the most surprising part of the entire game, because the Chiefs have faced some strong defensive lines before, including the Texans. On the other hand, the Eagles were one of the bottom teams in terms of pressures and only had 41 sacks on the season, just 2 more than the Chiefs. Neither team was elite in that regard, but the Eagles didn't need to blitz much. Their front 4 pressured Mahomes 16 times and sacked him 6 times, the most sacks he's ever taken in a game. Defensive coordinator Vic Fangio stuck to his game plan, playing zone coverage on all but 2 of Mahomes' dropbacks. Combined with the dominance from the defensive line, the Eagles were able to hold Mahomes to his second-worst performance by EPA in his career, with a negative 19.3. Interestingly, Mahomes now has 21 games with a negative EPA, and 3 of his worst 10 performances have come against defenses coached by Vic Fangio. The Eagles' mix of cover 4 and a strong pass rush was clearly the game-changer. I had expected Travis Kelce and maybe even DeAndre Hopkins to take advantage of the zone coverage, but that didn't happen. It was honestly awful all the way around. Mahomes seemed to be under constant pressure, and it looked like he was seeing ghosts. At times, he had players open, but he either didn't have time to let the play develop or missed them completely. He was just off in every way. A big part of that problem was the offensive line, and as I mentioned earlier, Joe Thuney was credited with allowing 7 pressures, the most of any lineman. Trey Smith gave up 3, and Jawan Taylor and Mike Sindo each allowed 2. Honestly, I'm not sure if PFF's numbers are accurate here. Some of those pressures on Thuney might actually belong to Mike Sindo. Mike Sindo was a major issue in this game, not only in pass protection but also in the run game. Take this one play, for example. He completely whiffed and ended up on his knees, way off to the right side during a Pacheco run. This is why I was really hoping DJ Humphries would step in as the left tackle, allowing Joe Thuney to move back to his natural position at left guard, where he's elite. Instead, the Chiefs were left with a solid but not great left tackle in Thuney and a below-average left guard in Sindo. This combination really hurt them, and we've seen a similar pattern in both of the Chiefs' blowout losses. When the offensive line gets dominated, the whole team struggles. After the game, Andy Reid said they'll learn from this and move on. But I thought we already learned this lesson back in Super Bowl 55. Apparently, we haven't. I get that Humphries was signed late in the season, got hurt, and didn't develop the necessary rapport with the offensive line, but the struggles here were insane. The Chiefs went through 4 different left tackles this season: Kingsley Sue-Matia, W. Morris, DJ Humphries, and finally, Joe Thuney. Meanwhile, Sindo was particularly awful in this game, earning the lowest PFF grade of anyone on the offense. The interior line collapse was a huge factor in Mahomes' sacks. Every time he tried to step up in the pocket, he was obliterated by the pressure. By halftime, Mahomes had a pressure rate higher than his completion percentage. Just think about that for a second. The Chiefs were down 24-0, and by the end of the half, they'd posted the fewest total yards in a Super Bowl since 1990, with only 23 yards in the first 2 quarters. It got worse as the game went on, with the Chiefs eventually trailing 34-0 to the Eagles. While Mahomes' stat line at the end of the game might have looked decent, a lot of that yardage and 2 of those touchdowns came in the final 2 drives when the game was already out of hand. It wasn't a good performance by Mahomes. You can't expect to perform well when you're getting pressured almost every other snap, and he admitted as much after the game. He said, "I let y'all down today. I'll always continue to work and try to learn and be better for it." Before giving a shout out to Chiefs Kingdom for their support and thanking God for the opportunity to play in another Super Bowl, he ended with a promise: "We will be back." Mahomes wasn't the only one struggling, though. DeAndre Hopkins had a rare miscue when he dropped a wide-open third-down catch. Had he not tripped and caught it, he might have even taken it to the house. It was a tough moment for him, and something you don't often see from such a reliable player. Travis Kelce also had his own struggles, dropping a couple of passes early in the game, including one on third down. One of the drops was especially tough, though. It was low and away, almost near his ankle, making it nearly impossible to catch. Still, it was a rough start for the Chiefs' stars all around. In the end, you can't win when you lose the time of possession by a 37-minute to 23-minute margin against a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, and you also hand them 3 turnovers. The Chiefs had a pick six, another interception that gave Philly the ball at the Chiefs' 14-yard line, which led to an A.J. Brown touchdown, and a strip sack early in the fourth quarter that gave the Eagles the ball back at the Chiefs' 30-yard line and eventually resulted in a field goal. That's 17 points off turnovers right there, and if you take those 17 points away, it could have actually been a game. Though the offense wasn't doing much at all to help. It's tough to swallow because this was the worst kind of loss on the biggest stage. The Chiefs fall to 3-2 in Super Bowls in the Mahomes era, but both of their losses have been absolute blowouts. Moving forward, it'll be interesting to see what changes the Chiefs make from a coaching and roster perspective. Many are already calling for offensive coordinator Matt Nagy to be fired, but here's the thing: Andy Reid calls the plays, not Nagy. Reid gives Nagy a code word that represents a play, and Nagy then finds the full play on his call sheet and relays it to Mahomes. So the blame really falls on Andy Reid here. He didn't adjust when he needed to, and he got outcoached. I was surprised when the offensive line didn't get any changes coming out of halftime. Joe Thuney stayed at tackle, and Sindo stayed at left guard. The only lineman who had a decent day was Creed Humphrey, who allowed 0 pressures, the only one on the offensive line to do so. At the end of the day, this was a horrible loss. The Chiefs were outcoached, outperformed, and out-executed. It's a tough one to forget, but I'll say this: as bad as this loss was, it's still an amazing time to be a Chiefs fan. They've made it to 7 straight AFC championship games, have been to 5 Super Bowls in 6 years, and won 3 of them. That's the stuff of a dynasty. So, despite how bad this loss feels, I choose to remain grateful because I know there are fans of teams like the Bills and Bengals who've never seen their team even win a Super Bowl. Getting to the big game is rare, and winning it is even harder. Remember that Mahomes isn't even 30 yet, and he has plenty of time left in his career. Andy Reid is under contract for a few more years, Spagnuolo is coming back next season, and Kelce, Chris Jones, and other key pieces should be back as well. Yes, this loss hurts, And yes, it was ugly. But after the sting wears off, let's remember how rare and special this Chiefs run has been. We'll be back.